Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. The Ukraine War news update, first part thereof, well, second part, I don't know, it's a part for the 11th of July 2024. I did a piece earlier, I had to purge some destructive thoughts in my head about the status of the world with regard to China and Russia and Trump and Orban and NATO, Hungary. It's all sort of playing on my mind at the moment, and I think we're at a bit of an interesting time in history, and it ain't good. So anyway, I purged myself there, and now we're on to where I normally start the day, which is Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats applied. Now, you can find those caveats in the description to the video below. There isn't too much to discuss. All the bandwidth seems to be taken up with NATO and everything surrounding that, and so actually there's very little content for me to share with you. Even Andrew Perpetua, his stats aren't out yet, but we'll look at the general staff figures. 1,110 personnel lost, 2 tanks, 17 armored personnel vehicles, 59 artillery systems. So okay, personnel about where it's been. Another low day of tanks, another just on average day of APVs, higher in terms of artillery systems than yesterday. So a little bit here and there. 4 multiple launch rocket systems, that's a high number of those lost in a day, and 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, likewise high. 3 were lost yesterday. That could be good news, depends what they are. 56 vehicles and fuel tanks, pretty high, and then 4 pieces of special equipment, lower in that category. So mixed bag of nuts, I guess. Fairly decent for the Ukrainians to be taking 59 artillery systems, like that's for sure, and the usual kind of attritional pressures put on the Russians. Just looking at a thread, I'm not going to go through the whole thread. A lot of looking at satellite images and discussing different variants of certain vehicles, but we've got another jumpy thread looking at those, looking at the evidence for what the stockpiles are for different vehicles. Goes on towards the end of the thread to say that let's look at the situation regarding BTR 60, 70, 80, so different age groups of these BTR vehicles, armored personnel vehicles. First, or armoured fighting vehicles, you could argue. First, as you can see in my table, most of the stored BTRs are 70s. 60s appear to be mostly specialised versions, as they are almost exclusively stored at artillery depots. BTR 80s were almost exclusively stored at the 22nd, and they are well on their way to extinction, so those are the newer variants of those. So let's look at some minor storage bases that hold BTRs. Let's start with one at Sigro. All 198 BTR 70s stored there were cannibalized at some point during this war. So the idea is that they are getting cannibalized. It says this points to what I've said multiple times. BTR 70s are increasingly in use in the rear due to increasing lack of modern armor to replenish the losses in general, and then it sort of goes to an Oryx datasheet to look at some of the losses of such vehicles, and then goes to look at some of these other sites and said, okay, there are none left here, there's the same amount left there, so on and so forth. And we're going to go to look at the final table here. He said, as I said in my previous threads on BMPs and BTRs analysing other footage, the rate of BMP cannibalisation and removal from storage has gone up recently. Even with most footage in this thread being a lot older than Vision's, you can see BMPs decrease in total from 6,021 before the war to 4,325 in the most recent footage. 1,696 fewer BMPs in storage in a little over 2 years, and a huge share of what remains are broken vehicles or specialised versions that aren't useful in combat, and BMP2s are almost gone, and most of what remains being BMP1s. BMP3s have completely gone. In the case of BTRs, BTR 80s are 2 almost entirely gone from storage, so they're the most recent ones. BTR 70s have slowly started to appear on the front lines, although in my humble opinion it'll take time for them to arrive in big numbers. With over 1,500 BTR 70s in storage as of the latest footage, and even that is out of date, so it would be even less than that. They can still replenish losses with these for a long time, although it remains to be seen how many can be converted to the modernised BTR 70M version, with BTR 80 rear hull section and turret and diesel engine far better than the baseline BTR 70. I doubt we'll see BTR 60s ever, not in significant amounts, maybe At some point, we'll see some here and there, but that's it. They're too old. Not as many as BTR 70s, and probably mostly broken and all cannibalized for spare parts to export to BTR 60 user countries. I think 100 BTR 60s came to Ukraine from Bulgaria recently, and so on and so forth. So the table, although it looks like there are quite a few vehicles left, it does come with a lot of caveats. So, BMPs in 2021, there were, as mentioned, 6,021, and now there's 4,325. But that footage is not necessarily recent footage. Some of that footage is really quite old, and so there's a chance that these figures have been massively decreased, and it's just the case of, well, what is left? How in what state is that? So the idea here is that with BMPs, although it looks like there's a lot left, those are mainly BMP ones, and a lot of them are in a lot of trouble. So yeah, there are a bunch of figures. Make of that what you will. You can go and look at these sorts of threads and spend forever and a day sort of analysing what the conclusion is. Yeah, and here's actually a more recent stat. And actually, let's look at this one, because this gets a working, broken, and total. So with regard to BMPs, you've got 4,325, of which almost 2,000 of them are broken. Possibly 2,500 are working. And they will be mainly BMP ones, which is a big number of vehicles, right? But they are cycling through them every single day. And how long does it take for them to take these BMP ones out of these deep stockpiles and then refurbish them up to being able to be used on the front line? So the idea is that when you see these loss figures on a daily basis, you go, goodness me, how can they lose 20 a day? And same for the artillery systems that are not mentioned here, but losing 59 artillery pieces a day, or at least somewhat losing, depending on how damaged they are and how easily fixable they are. You're thinking, well, actually, when they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of these, then they are clearly able to go on for a lot longer and take those hits more consistently than you would think ever was possible, especially when you look at the sort of stockpiles of, say, the British Army. You think, well, we'd be done within like a week, but the Russians have the Soviet stockpiles that are just sitting there. But the question is, okay, they might have these stockpiles, but what would it look like on the front line if they're continually able to replenish these losses of BMPs and BTRs at the rate that they need? And then you come on to look at this: so Russian homemade buggies being used in Ukraine. Okay, these are quite useful for getting over terrains, but then no different really from maybe a BTR. Okay, they're lighter. But do they offer you as much protection? Why are you seeing stuff like this on the front line if they have these thousands and thousands of vehicles that they could still bring to the front line? And the answer has to be that actually they are not able to bring these to the front line because these are being cannibalized. Although it says working here, there's going to be issues with the footage not being totally recent, and with working being a wide category, including, it may be working, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to them in order to get into the front line. And so as a result, you're seeing more and more of this kind of equipment. And that's all I have to say on equipment today. We are going to just quickly look at some fires. There's a huge fire, pillar of smoke rising from a factory building in Khimki, city of Khimki, 5,000 square meters burning in a place that produces tiles. Inside the shop, there are 30 gas cylinders that can explode. 10 of them were taken out by firefighters. Anyway, that's a big fire going on. Then yesterday, there were 3 fires in Russia that, again, just add to the list of fires. Krasnodar, the district court building was on fire. No news about the cause of that. You had an explosion on the top of a building in Moscow. No news as to what that was. Don't think it was a drone or anything like that. May only be a domestic fire, which I don't usually report, but eyewitnesses reported a loud explosion and the attic and roof caught light. So who knows about that one in Krylatskoye. And then we have a pretty sizable fire, spectacular fire in Volgograd. A recycling warehouse was on fire, spreading to over 1 square kilometer. I mean, this was a huge fire. Flames have already engulfed a small reinforced concrete building next door. So that's a pretty massive fire there that has caused quite a bit of consternation in that neck of the woods in Volgograd. So fires are plenty. There's also been a building materials warehouse on fire in Luhansk today. I don't know if that's a strike in occupied Luhansk. Could well be, rather than a random fire. Going on to distant strikes, again, not too much to report. Air Defense claimed they shot down 6 drones that attacked into Ukraine last night. I don't know if that's all 6 drones, but anyway, that was in Mykolaiv, Khmelnytsky, Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk regions. So just a few being sent in here and there. Then there were some ballistic missiles reported as being sent in this morning. 2 Iskander-M warheads hit the village of Krolovets in Sumy region up in the north of Ukraine. No news yet on the target, but local authority says 1 civilian was injured. So the Ukraine is still being targeted by the Russians. Then you've got Yevpatoria last night. This looks like a fairly significant fire going on right near the coast. Could be some maritime target being taken out. You've got some pretty sizable fires going on there. Not quite sure what was struck in Yevpatoria, but certainly something on fire big time there last night. And then in the Moscow region today, Russian defense forces shot down a drone that was flying towards Moscow, according to Mayor Sobyanin. And 2 drones were shot down over the Bryansk region, 1 over the Tambov and Tula regions, according to Defense Ministry. So more might come out during the course of today. I'll have a look at the end of this video if anything new has popped up. Going on to other bits and pieces, Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade say that they've halted a Russian advance towards Borova. So if you remember, on the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea, just by Svatova in the middle, there's this supposed accumulation of 10,000 Russian troops that are going to be pushing westwards towards a place called Borova that sits on the Oskil River. They're going to try and get over the Zherebets River towards the Oskil River, but it's quite a big ask for those troops. Even if there are 10,000, we've seen 50,000 get bogged down in Kharkiv and pretty much fail. So Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade, who are pretty decent, say that they've halted the Russian advance towards Borova in the Kharkiv Oblast. Ukrainian soldiers thwarted Russia's plans to make a breakthrough toward the village of Borova, according to the deputy commander of Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade there today. So that could be significant. The US is discussing with Ukraine the possibility of authorizing long-range strikes against Russia with American weapons. This was reported by Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Christopher Smith in commentary to the Voice of America. We've had now Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the Majority Speaker just for the House of Representatives for the GOP, saying that. We've got Mitch McConnell coming out quite firmly in support of robust American support of Ukraine, right? And now we've had John Kirby still saying, well, we're in talks, and giving that anti-escalation rhetoric, which I think is just counterproductive. But there are ongoing conversations, and let's hope that the US can change their minds on that. He noted, that is Christopher Smith, that security assistance will be adapted to Ukraine's needs. Well, fingers crossed on that one, because everyone is talking about it. And I think this gives you a sense of how challenging it is at the moment for the Ukrainians. So although the Russians have failed up in Kharkiv, the front line for the Ukrainians is really difficult for the Ukrainians, right? They are under-equipped and under-mobilized, as in they're lacking in personnel. Yes, there are new brigades being formed, and there are convict brigades and all sorts, and there's now news of a brigade being formed, an international legions type thing, or I think Ukrainians who are living abroad in Poland. There are things afoot, and it looks like Ukraine are getting tooled up a little bit more. But along the front lines, it is still really difficult. And although some of these areas, I say it's not a problem if they lose that area, it's not a problem if they lose that area, I think there are a few areas that are really significant. And one of them is the Toretsk, New York area. Okay. And if you remember, there's this might be the area where they got under the pipes and got behind the Ukrainians, or it might be, I can't remember, that's Toretsk, or whether that's up through New York. But you can see how thin the bridgehead is here. And as Julian Röpke, the German tabloid journalist, says, whenever you think, what a great opportunity to flank and cut off those B words, you realise over the coming days that in reality, there's simply nobody on the Ukrainian side to execute such seemingly easily doable manoeuvre. Russian forces are further advancing in New York, and this is true. If you would if you could, you aren't so you can't. Right? The idea here for me is that this is a perfect opportunity for the Ukrainians to cut the head off the snake here, and they could, or indeed cut most of the body off the snake. They could do a counterattack across the bottom here, take all that area here, and isolate the Russian forces from supply, surround them, and then take them out. That's a relatively easy thing to do if you had the capacity to do that. And that they're not doing that shows you that actually the Ukrainian defense is wafer thin. And that's how the Russians are able to just keep advancing consistently, but at huge cost to the Russians. So I think this is all bad for the Russians, but it doesn't mean to say it's not bad for the Ukrainians as well. And I think you are seeing a wafer thin Russian offensive capability that is pitted against a wafer thin Ukrainian defensive capability, or capacity. Where I said to you that the Russians started up here and the Ukrainians started here, and the Russians have massively been attrited. But then so have the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians might not have been attrited so much, but the percentage difference between these two is still the same, right? It goes kind of like that. So the Russians are being attrited at a much quicker rate. But actually, when you look at the bottom to where Ukraine are as a percentage of the bottom to where Russia are, the percentage is kind of the same. In other words, they are attriting each other but at levels that are problematic for each other. And we're kind of at the same spot now than we were maybe 2 years ago. It's just that both sides have got a forced dilution where they've had to reconstitute with poorer troops, and they've got a forced degradation as well. And it is affecting both sides significantly. Right. We're going to talk about something completely different here. So Andrew Kostin here says, a significant result for the first time since the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion. Ukrainian prosecutors and investigators have physically arrested a ship that was illegally exporting agricultural products through occupied Crimea. Previously, such arrests were made only in absentia. The investigation established that the Cameroon-flagged vessel twice entered and exited the port of occupied Sevastopol in violation of Ukrainian legislation and international maritime law in 2023 and 2024. To conceal the illegal activities, the ship's automatic identification system, AIS, was turned off, which is a gross violation of maritime safety requirements. The captain of the vessel, a citizen of Azerbaijan, has been served a notice of suspicion. We are continuing the investigation, including looking into the alleged exports of grain, possibly of Ukrainian origin, from the occupied Crimea by this vessel. I call on the international community to strengthen efforts to counter violations of the sanctions regime in order to deprive the aggressor state of further resources to continue its criminal war of aggression. Now, I presume this vessel has then docked in subsequently to a Ukrainian port in order for this to happen. Like, Ukraine can't just arrest a vessel in the middle of nowhere. So I presume this vessel has done some naughty stuff, illegal stuff, I don't want to underplay it, some illegal stuff, and then come back maybe a year later to try and get some exports from Odessa, for example, and then it's been impounded at Odessa for having done that. That's how I would understand that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Not an awful lot to report, as mentioned today. It's somewhat of a quiet day. I will just check to see if there's any new news. Lucky you, we've got Andrew Perpetua's loss list that has just come out, so that's really good timing. You can see a huge difference between the Ukrainian numbers and the Russian numbers. Let's see what Andrew says. Here are the losses I could identify today. Russian notable losses: a Tor and a Buk damaged, Nona S destroyed, 3 tanks abandoned, 4 destroyed, 1 BMP-2 captured, 4 IFE abandoned, 3 more destroyed, 2 okay, so if we're looking at so we're looking at combat losses that are, I guess, probably about a 2-to-1 maybe even 3-1 of Russian to Ukrainian losses. And as you can say, in losses in total, that's going to be at least a 4-1, I would say there. Okay, now looking at what the Ukrainians have lost, we do have a radar that's taken out by Lancer AN-TPQ-36. That's going to hurt. We've got a BM-21 Grad or damaged by a Krasnopol. Grad was in a very good defensive position, but it might be destroyed. So that is the laser guided munition, but also a couple of Lancets there. Lancets still causing an awful lot of problem, and night vision drones being a right pain in the ass for the Ukrainians. Right. We have 3 Bradleys again, 1 destroyed, 1 abandoned, and one damage. Interestingly, the one that's destroyed was previously known to be abandoned, so that had been clocked before. Always worth noting, they aren't always new Bradleys. And I guess the same can be said for lots of equipment that might end up being like that, but certainly Bradleys are much more frequently on these lists. Now, for the Russians, they do have a Buk M12 loader and a Tor M2, so 2 air defense systems taken out, a whole bunch of boats there, surveillance and comms equipment, quite a few D30 howitzers, and then our usual range of tanks there, including a track guard and shed. Most of those destroyed and abandoned. Artillery, most damaged actually, only 1 destroyed. I think it's more difficult to destroy things like artillery. I've said that before. So when you have a D30, like an old school towed howitzer, you have the 2 tails or whatever that come out that you tow it with, and then you have a barrel and a loading mechanism, but there's not a lot to go wrong with it. So if you hit that, say you're hitting, I don't know, one of those legs, then that's not going to stop the howitzer from firing. Whereas if you take out with a drone the track on a self-propelled gun, then that thing can't move and it can't really be used unless it's like luckily just in the exact right position. There's lots more to go wrong with the self-propelled howitzer, because you can make all the ammunition on board blow up and so on and so forth. And so these towed howitzers often get damaged as opposed to destroyed. Anyway, BMP 2s and 1s, 1 BMP 3 there, quite a lot of those taken out. Usual culprits in terms of MTLBs and armored personnel carriers, Ural trucks and loaths and pickup trucks and motorcycles and quads and all sorts. So the Russians having a massive list of equipment lost, that is going to hurt compared to the Ukrainians there. That's a huge difference in the losses, although there's a radar for the Ukrainians and 2 air defense systems for the Russians. So, things to consider. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your support. Take care, everybody, and speak to you soon.